Danny Two Guns here with the Erie Fitness Lifestyle Podcast. Rolling solo today because my co-host Lisa-Kameni Foster is in surgery for the day. She is undergoing a FUPA surgery. Her words, not mine. Yesterday we filmed a special episode of the Erie Fitness Lifestyle Podcast dubbed the SoloSode, which we will release later this week. I still wanted to hop on today, even though we had that one, and do a little solo cast. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to pick up and go over some kind of frequently asked questions, some things that I think would be worth elaborating on, even though it's just going to be me and my little Maya Sora right here. It's a gift from my daughter. It's from the show Dinosaur Train. So a couple questions we've gotten since starting the podcast. There's been a lot of engagement, a lot of people talking about it, and I think a lot of the questions were worth elaborating on, which we're going to do now. So the first one was, as someone who hasn't worked out in years, decades, ever, how do you start? It's actually a great question because Joe, London, Danny, and I were at the Providence Functional Training Summit this past weekend, and in a lot of the marketing things, they were talking about how, as gym owners, we tend to chase the 20% of people who already work out, when the reality is 80% of the people don't currently work out. And when you actually look at that data, that 80% don't and won't set foot in a traditional gym, and only 20% do, it seems silly that people always chase that 20%, and we really aim to tackle that 80%. So we've actually built our facility, our programming, our community, our operations around that 80%. So when someone hasn't worked out in years, decades, ever, that's actually the person we want to attract and the person we've actually built this gym for. On another side of it, what typically happens when people have worked out, they typically haven't been doing the right things, and then they actually have all these compensations that we then have to address, where presenter this past weekend, Evan Osar, talked about how he rather have the people who haven't worked out ever or in the recent history, because they don't have to fix any compensations that people typically build in traditional gym settings. Not knocking anybody, but some of the people we have who come in here the most broken are people who have done the boot camp beatdown stuff, or people who have done P90X and done things wrong and haven't had things coached. And then we actually have to fix a bunch of problems rather than kind of starting from the ground up and just building that foundation there. Because when we don't have to take care and fix any negative habits or negative compensations, what we are able to do is actually hit the ground running a lot faster than if we have to fix all these issues, or there's all these bad habits that people have been ingrained in doing exercises wrong that we then have to fix and coach. So when we look at that, when have someone who hasn't started, you can't just go do the random boot camp beatdown stuff because you haven't worked out in a while, but you absolutely can start with that individualized program. So like Hyphen and I have talked in the past, the people who I have to get in shape to join the gym, that may be true for the average gym, but it isn't true for this gym. And the program is literally built off of how do people start. They start exactly where they need to be with the exercises they exactly need for them specifically, which ties into the next question. What kind of exercise or exercise would it be? What does a progression look like? Now, tailing off what I said before, in the average gym where the programming is generic, or there's just, hey, this is the workout of the day, these are the workouts we're doing because it was written for the program, with no conscious or specificity to the person who is taking the workout, then you have to be kind of prepared for those exercises, where in our facility, the exercises are completely tailored to the person. But one of the things I'll talk about when people come in for a strategy session with us, which is the initial consultation we do, is that we go through the tour of the gym, and we always mention how it isn't about the implement. We have ultimate sandbags, we have kettlebells, we have barbells, we have trap bars, we have TRX, we have everything in between, but it isn't about the implement. It's about what we do with that implement. We always joke, like, what's the best exercise to do a kettlebell swing with? A kettlebell, right? What's the best implement to do a trap bar deadlift with, a trap bar. So the implement and the tool we use matter, because when someone says, a tool is just a tool, that's not true, right? There are unique qualities that each implement has that we want to be cognizant of, because the implement matters and what we do with an implement matters. Now here, we've talked about being principles-based and not methods-based. Now what that means in application is that it isn't about the implement. It's about, where is this person at? What does this person need? A good example is the TRX suspension trainer, where one of the best utilities of the suspension trainer is to regress or take weight off of an exercise. So when someone can't do a bodyweight squat, bodyweight isn't the most simple variation of an exercise, even though in most gyms it would be. Where the TRX, we can actually use it for assistance rather than resistance, and take some weight off that squat, give that squat better leverage for the person who's doing it, and all of a sudden we have this implement that can be used for some core nonsense shenanigans that no one should ever do, or it could be used for regressing and making something way easier. The average person comes in here and they can't do a lunge, they can't do a squat with body weight, because it's normal, because we haven't. And to start someone with just a bodyweight version of that makes no sense, because they can't do it. The suspension trainer gives us assistance and the ability to actually do that, which a lot of times people wouldn't be able to do. We always joke that, you go to the YMCA, I didn't say that, and the first thing they're doing in their group functional class is walking lunges down the street. The walking lunge is a super advanced exercise and absolutely not a beginner exercise, let alone holding weights, or sometimes they even had weights over their head and all these crazy things, where most people, they can't even do a basic lunge or a reverse lunge with their body weight, let alone an advanced variation like that. So assisting the movement is exactly what they need and exactly what that implement does. Circling back, since it's not about the implement we use, it's about what we do with it, the typical exercises look a lot like functional training, which has kind of been bastardized by people who, use buzzwords and things to mean certain things, where functional means to serve a function, but whatever that function means could be wildly varied depending on the person. But with that said, sitting on a machine does most of the work for you, turns off your core. It doesn't actually give the person any carryover to the real world application. So like I mentioned in the strategy session, when we talk about how there aren't any implements, it isn't about the implements we use. We also mentioned that most people say, hey, where are all your machines? And if we're being a smartass, we'll say we only have things that work, so we don't have them. But at the same time, when it's about a specific purpose and a specific goal of that exercise, it really changes things, and there's really not a whole lot of application for machines unless there's ignorance in certain parts. Now that could be taken the wrong way, but when there's lack of education, just throw someone on a machine. But if you actually know what this person needs, sitting on a machine that stabilizes their core for them, that does most of the work for them, and isolates a body part in a way that you never do in life, it doesn't help somebody. So actually having ways that do all of those things is the key. So to detail like what a squat progression could look like, the first time it could look like an assisted squat, where we're assisting with decreased load because you can take some away with your hands, and assisting the movement pattern because you don't have to stabilize as much. Then when that looks like we've gotten where we need to, we can progress that to just holding with a single hand, which again decreases the amount of help we have. And then from there, we can go to something where they're just tapping on a low box, so they know they still have a tactile cue for how deep they go, and an assistance on the pattern. And then we could progress to something like an ultimate sandbag. We call it a bucket hold or a bear hug squat, where we have an advantage position of holding the weight while we're still able to resist it. Then we can graduate to a front load ultimate sandbag position, in which we actually may have to decrease weight when we do this, but it's a lot harder for the core to stabilize in that position. So one of the things that we'll talk about later with DVRT is we can often make exercises harder with less weight, and all of a sudden we get better results because we don't have to load. Like in our facility, you have to have a very specific goal to end up with a bar squatting. But in body pump class, we use a bar, even though that's a really advanced concept. So like assisted with the TRX, semi-assisted with the TRX, a low box bodyweight squat which still has some help, a bucket squat, which gives you an advantage lever while still loading you, and then progressing in loading positions is a way we can progress through the squat, and let alone all the other patterns like lunging and pressing and pulling, hinging, core patterns, which typically is the most varied of the exercise selection we have, but also the one that has the most moving parts, where the misconception is that the core is crunches, which is actually a great recipe for lower back pain and not a great core exercise. And how we do those core progressions is very specific to the person as per the assessment. So just to close out that, what kind of exercises, what does an exercise progression look like? It looks like whatever is individualized to the person. So in that strategy session, we don't guess, we assess, and we give a person exactly what they need as per their ability level, their goals, and functionally what they can and can't do in this pattern. Our running joke is that the average male is inflexible and the average female is unstable, but typically it means that the average male needs flexibility, needs range of motion because he's too tight, and the average female actually has too much range of motion and needs more stability, needs more motor control, not more flexibility. So they need stability, the male needs mobility. The running joke being, why won't the average male ever be caught dead in yoga? Because it's too hard and probably what he needs. And why does the super bendy woman love doing yoga? Because she's super bendy and it's exactly not what she needs, where she needs more strength, more stability, more strength training, and the average male typically doesn't need more things that'll make him tighter. So what does a typical exercise progression look like? Something that's exactly individualized to you in every way, because it would be super simple if we had this one-size-fits-all fitness model. It would change a lot of the things we do here, but the reality is it just isn't true, and to feed into that does more harm than good. So acknowledging that we do need something individualized is exactly what a person needs, and exactly what we should be doing, and exactly what a person who's investing their time, energy, money, and faith into us deserves. And that's kind of how the easiest way for me to answer, like, what does a typical exercise progression look like? Because the reality is, when you look at movements, it's not rocket science, but it also isn't as simple as people want it to be. And again, it'd be nice if it is, but it just isn't. And again, I feel fostering that dialogue does way more harm than good. So let's acknowledge that people need something specific and individualized to them, and then give them that in a community and an environment, which is another story. But in terms of programming, the best way to get you to your fitness goals is something that's individualized to you in every way. And there's never going to be, I think, a scientific development that will change that. It may change the way application we do that, but the more individualized we can get something to a person, the better the results are going to be always. The last kind of third part of that question, what kind of time frame, how much time per week? Now, how much time frame, that's going to specifically depend on the person, right? Because we talk a lot about how people overestimate the amount they can accomplish in 1 month. They vastly underestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year. So in looking at people from a movement perspective, we can make some pretty quick acute changes in movement right away, but it's going to take time because that's how it works, right? So I can't give a specific answer as per like global time frame. Other than that, this is a lifestyle, just like the podcast says, where it's going to take time. We're going to do something forever, because when people say movement is life, that's an evidence-based statement, and there's just no way around it. So we need to move for so many reasons, and that should never stop. Specific goals may, but when it comes to actually, how long we're going to do this, the answer is forever. What that looks like, because it doesn't have to go hard balls to the walls forever, and it doesn't mean we can go easy forever, but we do be doing something for so many reasons. Now, how many times per week is a common misconception we talk about a lot, where a lot of the times people, they're going to start a fitness, they're going to make a change, and okay, I'm going to work out 6 days a week, 3 hours a day, I'm going to eat chicken and broccoli all day, I'm going to sleep 8 hours a night, I'm going to drink 2 gallons of water a day, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and they do none of it because that's how doing that works. But the thing with the whole 6 days a week, 3 hours a day, number one, who has time for that? Number two, that's actually infinitely worse than doing it well. But the misconception comes where people, when they do the wrong things, you have to make up for the fact that you're doing the wrong things with more volume, right? Which makes sense because you're not doing the best things for you, thus you have to do more of it. But when you're doing the exact things that are individualized to you, the exact things you need as a unique individual, 2 to 4 hours a week is typically what we're going to find as the best middle ground. The line we use here is, I can make 2 times a week work. There's nothing we can't accomplish in 4. And the magic number is usually 3. And then 3 to 4 hours being dedicated work in the gym. Ideally, we're doing things outside of the gym, moving more, enjoying life more, to steal a line from Maggie, past podcast guest, not sitting on the sidelines of our life and doing more, because the more we move, the better we feel, the more we're physically capable of doing. And then we do those things, right? Because the goal of being in the gym is not to do more gym things and be in the gym more. The goal is to enjoy life, do more things. With that said, 2 to 4, 3 to 4 diligent hours of in the gym work is typically going to be what people need. But again, people are busy, but it isn't to say like that means doing nothing else. But on the flip side, doing 2 is infinitely better than doing nothing, right? Because people are like, well, I can't dedicate 4 hours a week, so I might as well just do nothing. Not true at all. 1 hour is better than 0. 2 is better than 1, 3 is better than 2, 4 is better than 3, and then we can start seeing a curve that doesn't necessarily support that more is better, because better is better, more isn't better, and finding that middle ground between how much do I need. It's typically less than most people think, but it's a specific thing, right? Why do people who jog for fitness have to eventually do hundreds of miles and all these hours? Because they're not doing this thing that's individual or specific to them, or a thing that works really well, so to make up for that with more volume. Whereas when we're doing the things we need specifically for us, it doesn't have to be this ridiculously time intensive effort. It has to be something that is individualized to us and what we need, right? Because elaborating on a point from a little bit ago, when we look at a person's busy life, if getting to the gym 3 hours a week stresses them out to the point where they can't necessarily do it that well, 2 is infinitely better for that person, right? Because we want to have something that's specific to the person, where the thing that causes us stress, causes us to miss things, causing us to sleep less, doesn't necessarily fit in as well. So again, finding that minimum effective dose specific to the individual. There's no way to avoid the ever recurring theme that the thing that's most individualized to the person is going to be the most effective thing, because that's always going to be it, right? Where if some people, 4 to 6 hours a week in the gym is easy peasy. Some people, the Amanda, the Georgia, past podcast guests, them initially getting to the gym 2 to 3 times a week was something we diligently worked on for a long time, because there was a lot of variables that went into that. Where if their expectation was 6 to 8 hours a week, it would have never happened, right? Something that's individual to the person is always going to be the best thing we can do. That was kind of 3 questions lumped into one question. Another question, you use a lot of acronyms, DVRT, Kinstretch, XYZ, LMNOP. What exactly is all of it? Which I thought was funny, because Kinstretch is not an acronym or an abbreviation. But one of the problems with the fitness industry is that there are a lot of acronyms, there are a lot of crazy things, and nomenclature is always typically going to be something we struggle with, because people always call different things different things. So just parlaying real quick, DVRT stands for Dynamic Variable Resistance Training. Now, the implement of choice for DVRT is the ultimate sandbag, but the major tenet of DVRT is having the ability to progress and regress, make harder or make easier an exercise by not relying solely upon adding or decreasing weight. So how can we make an exercise harder without relying on adding weight? How do we make an exercise easier without just decreasing weight? Because like the old school body pump model, where how do you make this easier? Take some weight off. How do you make it harder? Put some more weight on. But what if you can't do the thing, right? We talked about earlier, what if you can't squat? What if you can't lunge? And you can't even do body weight, but body weight is the most simple variation. So with DVRT, it gives us building blocks for how we can make exercises easier or harder with manipulating other things, like how we hold the implement we're using, because one of the best utilities of the ultimate sandbag is that the weight is constantly shifting. It's never static, so we constantly have to stabilize, where, the barbell or the kettlebell, they have their place, but a 24 kilogram kettlebell will always weigh 24 kilograms. A 225-pound barbell will always weigh 225 pounds. But a 50-pound ultimate sandbag, depending on what you're doing, the sand is shifting. So depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it and where you are in the movement, it'll weigh different things. And demand we have to use or demand we have to create increases because the load is constantly shifting. So we have how we hold it, the stability of the implement or the implement we're using, how we're standing, the plane of motion we're using. One of the things and major tenets of DVRT is that a lot of fitness programs are front, back, and up and down. The problem with that is life doesn't work front to back, up and down. It works three-dimensionally, it works side to side, it works rotationally. So having exercises and progressions that allow us to actually do those things will help us from a functional perspective, because we don't just want to work on the same thing front to back, up and down all the time. One of the things with low back injuries is the most common cause of a low back injury is flexion and rotation. It's not just flexion. And the reason that is because people don't train how to rotate, right? And if you don't, the thing you don't train is the thing that's going to injure you. So having the ability to work three-dimensionally, because life happens in three dimensions, so should your exercise program. And that's missed in a lot of things. Good, Joe? Yeah. We'll edit this out. So parlaying off that, we have a Fit in 42 session coming up, and a common question we're beginning is, what exactly is Fit in 42? And a couple previous podcast guests have mentioned that they saw marketing for Fit in 42, and that's how they ended up at the gym. And it's a great program that we run. So what we typically do as a principle and structure of how our gym works is we aim to incorporate fitness into a person's life, not necessarily have a life that revolves around it. Some of the misconceptions we talked about earlier, they think it has to be this thing where they do all the things and then they eventually can't do any of them, because that's just how it works. So 2 to 4 hours a week, a nutrition program that we adhere to 80 to 90% of the time, that fosters a healthy relationship with food, motivation, lifestyle stuff, sleep stuff, motivation stuff, that all goes into how we're going to make this work in our busy life. So incorporate fitness into our life, not have a life that revolves around it. Now, one of the issues with that is sometimes that whole something that looks like moderation approach doesn't always work for people. It's the goal to get there, but that whole incorporating fitness into your life, not having a life that revolves around it, doesn't always work. So what Fit in 42 does is it's this total immersion process and this total immersion program where for 42 days you're ours and we're unequivocally yours. And in those 42 days, we're going to create and foster all of those healthy habits, kind of a fitness reboot, a fitness from the ground up. A common analogy that may not be so nice is, it's the Betty Ford Clinic of fitness, where, Betty Ford Clinic, you go there to get clean. You don't go there 2 to 3 hours a week, follow this stuff 80 to 90%. You are totally immersed. It's a total makeover and overhaul of everything you do. Now, when a person gets to that point, that's exactly what they need. So same thing applies with fitness, where one of the misconceptions about Fit in 42 is that it has a sexy name, it's short term, it's like this challenge we're going to do. And we're very diligent about not ever calling it a challenge, because it's not a challenge. It is a lifestyle transformation program where for 42 days, we're going to build this massive foundation for exactly what we need and how we need it in a way that's individualized to you, and take over every variable so that when we finish those 42 days, we've built such a solid, structured foundation that when we go to the moderation or incorporating fitness into our life, not having a life that revolves around it phase, we are fully prepared for that. And it could be completely specific to us because we've built the foundation and now we're ready for it. And it's a really great program because it solves so many issues that people deal with. 6 days a week, personal training session, full customized nutrition program, full motivation, full accountability, literally this total immersion process that takes care of every variable for you, because some people need that, right? And prior to implementing Fit in 42, we didn't necessarily have that structure that facilitated if we had a person who needed specifically that, and now we do. Now, what ends up happening, what happened with Terry, what happened with Georgia, is they kind of saw Fit in 42 marketing stuff, but when they came in, it wasn't Fit in 42 that was the best fit for them. And that's okay, right? And some people come in not necessarily looking for Fit in 42, and end up doing it. Some people come in looking for it, end up doing it. Again, in our facilities, it's all about what's individualized to the person, because that is unequivocally what works best. All right. So one of the interesting ones, because we had a couple of Kinstretch based episodes, and one of the questions we got, like, all that Kinstretch stuff looks interesting, but what if I'm not flexible? And I thought this was super interesting because it brings up something we kind of talked about previously, where one of the issues with yoga that we mentioned, not that I'm anti-yoga, is that you have to be a certain level of flexible in order to do it. And doing more of it doesn't necessarily make you better at it. So one of the things, and the whole underlying philosophy of Kinstretch, is that you don't have to be flexible, right? It's individualized to you, specifically where you're at, what you need, everything in between, and it meets you where you're at. The goal is not a pose or a position. The goal is strengthening and helping the structure of a joint through certain things, making joints work nice, making you better at being a human, whatever being a human means to you. So there's no level of flexibility needed. With that said, it doesn't just increase flexibility, it increases mobility. So the major tenet is increasing end range mobility with stability, because that which we can't stabilize only injures us. So when people say, like, well, you have to be flexible to do it, not at all, because it's always going to meet a person where they're at, from super hypermobile, needs more stability, to completely lacking mobility and needs more mobility and flexibility. So it'll meet the person where they're at, rather than, okay, the goal is this pose and doing this thing, where that shouldn't be the goal, right? The goal should be an improvement on whatever it is we're seeking and why we're doing this thing. So I thought that was a super interesting question, because the goal isn't flexibility. The goal is healthy range of motion in order to do human things and joint integrity. The only evidence-based, scientifically proven way to keep a joint healthy is to move it, and move it often in a full pain-free range of motion. Notice, is it pain-free? That's important. But that range of motion doesn't have, like, oh, it has to look like this. Right, it could look like this, could look like this, could look like this, could look like this, right? It just depends on whatever is individualized to that specific person, because, again, it's principles based. It's about improving the thing, in this instance, the way a joint moves, because we know certain range of motions are safer and better than others where we can't get to those positions, but also keeping the joint working as functionally and as healthy as possible is also the goal. Any other questions that popped up on the feed? No? Well, thanks for watching. That's this episode of the Erie Fitness Lifestyle Podcast. Stay tuned for the end of the week when we have the one and only SoloSode. Thanks for watching.